Okay, good afternoon. It is 2 o'clock on April 21st. I had some slight technical issues, but that seems to have been fixed by now. So I am 3 minutes late. I apologize for that. But I'll get right into it. No one's here right now, so I'll just start. Oh, hey, Raquel, good to see you. Hi, welcome. Um, since I do have you here, how caught up are you on To Kill a Mockingbird at the moment? What chapter are you up to? Um, I'm going to go over chapter 18 today, but before I do that, I'm going to go over a fluency assignment that you'll find on the Google Classroom site. Fluency is basically just practice reading out loud. If you go to the classwork section of the Google Classrooms, you'll see something titled Speed Read Challenge. Basically, what you're going to do here is click on this packet. It'll bring up a list of something crazy like 40, excuse me, 40 stories. You're not actually going to read all of those, so don't get worried about that. What you're going to do is pick one that you think is interesting. Go to that story. They're all one page, a page and a half long. It looks like they're 2 pages, but really they start a little bit below the first page. So they're all really just one page. What you're going to do is you're going to read that out loud and time yourself as you read it. Then you're going to go back to the beginning of the story, click this little blue icon right beside the title of the story. That will read the story to you. Then, after you read the story, you're going to read it again and time yourself to see how much you improve. And then you're just going to wait a day or two, read it out loud one more time, and record how fast you are there. And then you're also going to find this handy little organizer under the speed read challenge section. And you're just going to write the name of the passage that you read and how fast you read it each time you read it. So I made each one of you a copy of this so you can actually type in it when you pull it up, and you just list how quickly you read it. Hey, Malachi, I just noticed you. Good to see you. I was just going over a fluency section for Google Classrooms where you're going to read a passage out loud 3 times and time how fast you read it. The passages are all pretty short, so it shouldn't take you more than 2 minutes to read them out loud each time. So you're going to read the same passage 3 times and record your speed each time you read it. The first time you read it, the very first time you've looked at it, you're going to read out loud and time that. Then you're going to listen to the story and then read it again, time it, and then wait a couple of days and then read it again and time it. And there's 6 weeks left of class. You're going to end up doing 6 stories. There are like 40 stories to pick from, and they're all about a page. So you won't read all of those, so don't worry about that. Just pick the ones that you think are the most interesting. There's some that deal with sports, some of them are poetry. So there's kind of like a wide range of stories. There's a couple fables. There's some that are fiction. Just pick one that you think's interesting. I know you're a boxing fan, Malachi, and there's one by Muhammad Ali. So maybe you would be interested in that. But that is kind of like your project for the week, and you'll find that on the Google Classrooms under Speed Read Challenge. I was just asking Raquel what chapter she was up to. What chapter of To Kill a Mockingbird are you up to, Malachi? If you go to the classwork section of Fireball on Google Classrooms, you'll notice there's a summary for pretty much every chapter up to chapter 18, I think is the last one I did. And you're free to like look through those summaries if you want. There's a quiz for each chapter there as well. A lot of the answers are actually in the summary, so if you read the summary, you get a good idea about what's going to be on the quiz. Today I'm going to go over chapter 18. You were definitely past chapter one. It's funny. We read past that in class. I think we were on like chapter 10, I want to say, whenever class ended. If you uh, need the story, I'll just remind you that the story is under the um, the classwork. If you go all the way to the bottom of that, so you might have to hit view more a few times. But the PDF of the story is actually on there, and so it's right there, text version of To Kill a Mockingbird. So all the chapters are here. You can just read those. There's also a play version, or not the play version. There's an audiobook version. So if you'd prefer just to have someone read it to you, that's also there. So you can have someone read it to you. You can also listen to it. Um, I think I go back. This one starts, I think, chapter 7, or no, chapter 11, and this is like chapter 6 through 10, in case you were behind a little bit. There's also a play version of it on there. It's a high school play version of it, so it follows pretty closely, but it's not identical. And then there are quizzes on here that you can take at your leisure. Um, since you two haven't been on here in a while, basically the packet that I sent home has a schedule week to week, and then this is kind of like supplementing that. So this is what we would have been going over had class not canceled, and the packet kind of supplements that with more writing assignments, some vocab, and a couple like little short stories. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to just explain chapter 18 to you. Other than the speed read thing, what I added was the summary to chapter 18. There's a video of Mayella at trial because chapter 18 is all about Mayella Mayella Ewell's testimony. And the movie, the black and white one that I showed you a few clips from already, that the old timey black and white movie actually covers it pretty close. So you can watch that to get a good visual of what we're going to be going over. And I also found a clip from the Broadway version. It has the director of the Broadway version, which is newer, and the actress who plays Mayella. Both of them talk about the motivations and the situation that Mayella is in. She comes across as something of a villain in the story, but she's also someone who's been deeply affected by poverty and been abused by her father and society alike. So it kind of goes into her unfortunate situation and why that causes her to lash out at Tom Robinson and why he ends up being in such a bad position. Not to totally excuse what she's doing, but it kind of explains why she does it. So that's a good video to watch. We definitely would have watched it in class as a group and discussed it had the quarantine not happened. But since we only have about 20 minutes left, I'm going to go over chapter 18. So chapter 18, this is the second part of the trial. For all the build-up that the book goes over, the trial only really has 3 parts. There are only 4 witnesses. Heck Tate and Mr. Ewell were in chapter 17. Chapter 18 is all Mayella, and she's the victim. She is the one who is accusing Tom of having raped her, and this entire chapter is devoted to her. So Mayella, just so you get an idea of who she is, she's 19 years old. By Ewell standards, she's relatively clean. You can contrast that to her father, who appeared red because he had scrubbed all the dirt off, almost looking like someone who hadn't taken a bath in some time. Mayella, by other accounts, is actually like neat in general. So she lives in a very impoverished area. She lives in the dump in a cabin, excuse me, but she still tries to keep herself clean. One section of the dump, she actually plants flowers in and tries to brighten the place up. So she's a little bit more respectable than the other members of her family. She went to school for, I believe, 2 to 3 years, so she is able to read and write to some extent. She is frightened by Atticus's treatment of her father. She doesn't quite understand why her father being left-handed is such a big deal. But she realizes that Atticus tricked her father into revealing that. So she appears kind of worried and resentful towards Atticus before the trial really turns towards questioning her, and she has to be reassured by the judge before she's really even willing to talk to the prosecutor, who's the one on her side. Remember, she's the victim, so the prosecutor is the one trying to convict the person who she's accusing. So you would expect her to be, more favorable towards the prosecutor, but she's still kind of resentful towards him even too. Mayella's story. So when Mayella gets to describe her story to the prosecutor, basically what she says is that her father, before he left, told her to chop up a chifferobe for kindling or firewood. A chifferobe is just another word for a dresser, so it's like a big dresser. She's a smaller woman, so when she saw Tom walking by, she offered him a nickel to break the dresser up. She then claims that she went inside her house to get the nickel, and when she was inside, Tom attacked her from behind. He choked and raped her, but her father arrived, and that caused Tom to run away. So her story's pretty quick. When the prosecutor asks, explain what happens, she doesn't go into details, and that's basically all she explains to the prosecutor. Atticus, on the other hand, tries to delve in, because again, Atticus asks questions in a way similar to how he interacts with everybody. Scout described him as being kind of boring when he questions people, but if you remember back a chapter when he questioned Mr. Yule, it was kind of boring, but when it came time to make his point came across. Like, he showed everybody that it was possible that the father was the one who did this. And he didn't even have to say out loud, I think Mr. Yule is the one who beat Mayella. Instead, he just kind of like lays breadcrumbs and lets people figure that out for themselves. But everybody in the audience understood the point he was making. And Mr. Yule, you can judge by his reaction and how angry he got, definitely understood the implications of Atticus's questioning. So Mayella realizes that Atticus is smart. She realizes that he can be tricky. So she's very hostile when he begins. Very early on to the questioning, she accuses him of mocking her and refuses to answer any more questions. When the judge talks to her, basically what he figures out is Mayella thinks that Atticus is making fun of her when he calls her ma'am and miss. She's never been treated respectfully before. Remember, the Yules are treated fairly badly by the rest of town. The town does give them charity from time to time in the form of church baskets, which includes food. And they let them live for free in this cabin that was abandoned. And they allow the father to hunt outside of season, which nobody else gets away with. But they're looked down upon. They're like the lowest rung in Maycomb society, right? So they're below the Cunninghams, who are also very poor. They're below all the people who live in town. They're just kind of considered to be the bottom of the social totem pole. And Mayella knows this, so Mayella assumes that Atticus is making fun of her when he calls her miss or ma'am, almost just being sarcastic. Atticus, however, eventually is able to ask her questions, and what he does is he gets her to paint a picture of her home life. So through questioning, you find out that she only went to school for 2 to 3 years. Her mother's been dead for some time. Her father disappears into the swamp for days, sometimes a week at a time. No one in the family has shoes typically. In the winter, the shoes they do get are made from old tires, so they kind of just wrap tires up and turn those into shoes in the winter when they need them. But again, they're in the south, so winters aren't very bad, and snow's pretty uncommon. They have no running water. They have to fetch buckets from the stream. So if someone wants to take a bath or wash themselves, they have to retrieve their own water to do so. Their father drinks heavily, and he typically drinks away all of their relief money. That would be this time period's form of welfare, so like unemployment money that they get. Atticus also suggests that Mayella's father might beat her when he drinks. So he asks that question. Mayella says that he doesn't, in fact, beat her, but she looks at him and there's a pause, and everyone in the audience and everyone on the jury kind of gets the sense that she's answering that way because he's looking at her and she does have to go home with him. So there's like an element of fear, right? So something the book really does a good job of getting across without telling you directly is the notion that she's probably afraid of her father. Father probably beats her, and it's suggested that he might abuse her in other ways too, although it never spells out exactly what those ways are. And because the book's from Scout's perspective, and Scout at this time is like 9, 10 years old, those clues kind of go over her head. So she explains what's happening in the court, and she uses the words that her dad's using and that Mayela's using, but the implications of how bad Mayela's life is kind of missed on Scout because she's so young. Mayela does admit during the questioning, and this is important, to the fact that she has asked Tom to do chores in the past for her, claiming that she's always paid him a few pennies or a nickel, and that she's asked other black men to do the same thing because they're always walking by. So she'll ask them to, fetch a pail of water from the stream for her, break up some piece of furniture that they can use for kindling. So she does admit that she knows who Tom is prior to this incident, but she tries to wave it off almost like she thinks all the black people who come by are basically the same. It's also important to remember that the Yules live in the dump, and the African American community is beyond the dump. So most, like the characters that we've met, like Zebo, the Reverend, Calpurnia, they all live just past the dump, so they would have to pass by the Yules in order to get into Macomb. The important part of her testimony is really the attack. So Atticus asks for more specifics. Specifically, he wants to know how she was attacked. So instead of how the prosecuting attorney just kind of says, well, hey, what happened? Put it in your own words. Atticus goes into detail. He wants to know how she was attacked, how he got into the house. Specifically, he wants to know how he beat and choked her. So he makes her recount that the person grabbed her by the neck, how the person beat her, to which Mayela tries to say she doesn't really remember. Atticus, during this point in time, has Tom stand up. And this is the big reveal in the court, and that's the fact that Tom, even though he's a fully grown man and he's pretty muscular from Scout's description of him, he only has one fully grown arm. His left arm was crippled in an accident at Dolphus Raymond's cotton farm when he was very young. So one arm's fully grown and muscular, but the other arm only comes down to about where you would expect someone's elbow to be. And he has basically no control over it. One of the people in the audience, I think the Reverend, leans over and explains to Jem and Scout that was something that occurred when he was young at the cotton farm of Dolphus Raymond. And Dolphus Raymond, again, is the man who lives within the African American community. He has a bunch of mixed children. He pretends that he's drunk kind of as an excuse. That way the white society doesn't discriminate against him too harshly. But that's how Tom couldn't have beaten her with his left hand because his left arm doesn't work. Atticus really harps on this point at this part of the trial, how could he possibly have beaten her with his left arm when his left arm is basically useless. Also, he harps on the point, why didn't the other children hear? By all accounts, there are 6 to 9 children that are always in that cabin. They don't go to school, so they're generally in that area playing in the dump and just up to kind of mischief. Why did none of them hear Mayela? Mayela kind of fills in the motherly role because there is no mother there, so that's kind of, she's always around the children. Why did none of the children come to her aid? Why did none of the children go get help? And he also asks her again if it was her father who beat her. He tried to get her to say the truth. He says at one point, I just want you to tell me the truth. What happened? This is a really impactful, emotionally charged part of the trial, because if she does acknowledge the fact that she had been lying, that Tom didn't attack and rape her, it will cause her reputation to drop even farther. The way that Mr. Yule in the last chapter was using the trial to build up his reputation by being comedic and by going against Atticus, who's the smart guy in town, this would lose that much prestige as well. But it's also pretty obvious that Tom couldn't have done the things that he was accused of doing. For one, he couldn't have choked her with one arm while he beat her with the other because he really only has one arm. Atticus also brings up, why didn't you just run away? He only has one arm. While he was hitting you, there's no way he could have grabbed her at the same time. It just kind of points out all these weaknesses in her story and tries to get her to admit to what really happened. Mayella seems shaken at this point. She refuses to really answer the question that Tom did it. Instead, she stands up and tries to shame the jury and the crowd into believing her, because even though she's so low and the Yules in general are so low on kind of the Macomb totem pole, she's still white and Tom's still black, and because segregation and because we're in the 1920s or 1930s, she still kind of like demands that they convict Tom just because she's white and he's black, and that her word should be enough. So she's really appealing directly towards racism and their sense of like pride, to shame them into convicting Tom, even though it's pretty clear to Scout and Jem that there's no way Tom's guilty. So from the kid's perspective, the trial should probably be over at this point, and from someone in today's time period looking back, we would probably say, yeah, like this should be dismissed at this point, but the trial keeps going on. Atticus reacts to this kind of poorly too. Once Mayella starts crying and refuses to answer any more questions, Atticus sits down and puts his face down on the table, or on the desk rather, and hey, Brianna. And it's pretty clear that he's not proud of himself for what he had done. Now, we don't know, as readers of the story, if this is because Atticus thinks he's lost somehow, because maybe he feels like he needed her to confess that Tom wasn't guilty, or maybe he's ashamed with himself for having kind of shamed this poor young woman who, her life's pretty miserable. Her home life's awful. In fact, when she goes home, she's probably going to get beat by her father. And Atticus has kind of just embarrassed her in front of the entire town. And just knowing who Atticus is as a person up to this point, he's kind of put in this position where he either has to shame Mayella to save Tom, or he has to let Mayella, put Tom in a really bad position, because again, he's being accused of rape, and in this time period, that's a death sentence offense. So he could be killed if he's convicted. So, Brianna, I noticed you're here. I'm just going over chapter 18. I'm pretty close to the end of it. This summary will show up on the Google Classrooms, so you can read it before you take the quiz. There's also going to be 2 videos there. One video is the black and white movie clip for this chapter, and it pretty much shows the chapter verbatim, where Atticus is questioning Mayella. Mayella is the woman accusing Tom, his client, of rape. And you see through this clip kind of like all the emotions going back and forth. You get the idea that Atticus really doesn't want to question her as strongly as he is, and how embarrassed Mayella is to be there and to go over her story, and how angry she is when she actually does blame Tom for what happened. And like I mentioned, the trial only has 4 witnesses. She's the 3rd. The next chapter will be the chapter where Tom Robinson takes the stand, and he explains what happens. So you'll see the big differences in between what Tom says happened and what Mayella says happened, and how much more logical Tom's account of the situation is versus Mayella's. How what Mayella says happened really couldn't happen, in lieu of the fact that Tom's left arm only comes down to his elbow and that he can't really use it. Another important thing to remember in what's happening now is that it's very likely that Mayella's father beats her, and it's very likely that she was beat by her father rather than Tom. It's fairly obvious Tom couldn't have beat Mayella because all of her bruises are on the right side, and his left arm just doesn't work. So a question that this should leave you with is, why does the trial still go on, right? Like, it's pretty obvious that Tom's innocent of what he's accused of. Why do you think the judge doesn't just throw the case out? It's obvious he couldn't do it. It's obvious he's not guilty. The sheriff still arrested him, though, even though the evidence was very stacked against Tom. It's obvious he couldn't have done it. Why did the sheriff arrest him? Why is the trial still going on? Why does it look like the white jurors still intend to convict Tom, even though it's obvious he couldn't have done it? Like, why is this all still happening, right? And, like, the kids voice this, Dill, Scout, and Jem all expect Atticus has already won, even though the trial's still going on. So, why, right? That's like a really big question that still kind of lingers. Another thing to keep in mind are kind of the comparison between Bob, that's Mr. Yule, and Mayella, like how they react to the situation, how Mr. Yule's unashamed of his position. He's lazy, he's crude, he's crass. Mayella's kind of embarrassed by her position in life, and she's trying to make it better. She cares about her appearance. Mr. Yule doesn't care about his appearance. Mr. Yule's very defiant towards Atticus, almost like it's a fight. Mayella's initially frightened of Atticus, but then becomes defiant. Mr. Yule treats his daughter disrespectfully during the trial. Like, he mentions that she was like lying on the ground, crying like a stuck pig, like a pig that had been stabbed. Like, that's his daughter who had presumably just been raped and beaten, and that's how he's referring to her. Also, he takes the trial as a joke. He eventually does become angry and defiant, though. Mayella, on the other hand, she initially tries to shut down. Jem thinks that she might just be trying to get sympathy by, like, pretending to cry in the beginning. But by the end, by the time that Atticus is done questioning her, those tears are definitely real. And that anger that she shows when she tries to shame the audience into convicting Tom is definitely real. So those are definitely real tears coming out at the end. I know we're out of time together, but if you go to the classwork section, I mentioned it well. I think just Raquel was here. You can watch the video of Mayella at trial, and it covers this entire chapter. So if you weren't caught up and you want to just watch it, you could just watch this clip. It's 7 minutes long, and it shows you this entire chapter, and it's basically word for word the same. The summary that I just went over is also on there if you click the summary. Earlier, another student said he couldn't get it to open, so I took it down and put it back up. So I think it works now. When I click on the link, I can look at it. And there's also this other clip of a more modern actress on Broadway and the director for the Broadway version, and they explain Mayella's motivations and who she is as a character. So it's kind of like a modern take on Mayella. They try to explain how in today's day and age, it's kind of like an uncomfortable situation that a large part of the story deals with the notion that a woman is falsely accusing a man of rape. Like, it's pretty obvious in the story that Tom didn't rape her, but it kind of turns her into like a villain. But at the same time, she's also still very much a victim. She's a victim of her position in society. She's definitely a victim of her father. And instead of trying to get out of that bad position in a better way, she kind of lashes out at Tom and blames Tom, even though he's definitely just kind of like an innocent bystander who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and now he's being accused of this crime and on trial for his actual life. Because, like we said before, in the 1930s, a white man or a white woman who accuses a black man of rape, if that black man's convicted, he's probably going to get a death penalty, if not life in prison. So there is a quiz that you can take for this chapter. It's pretty short. I think I went over most of the questions that are going to be on it. You can always refer to the summary as you're taking the quiz if it gives you any trouble. This chapter, for as long as it is, only focuses on Mayella and her account of the events from that night. So the quiz is pretty short because they kind of go over the same things multiple times in this chapter. So the quiz is pretty short. The quiz that I'll put together for chapter 19 will probably be a little bit longer, just because when Tom actually gives his rebuttal of what happened, there's a lot more that happens there. So class is pretty much over. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot a message my way. It's okay if you guys are behind on taking the quizzes. I know I don't think anyone's up to chapter 16 yet for having turned in a quiz. And that's okay. Just try to work, 20 minutes a day, and that's fine. The packets should have gotten to you by now. Hopefully, you've gotten those, and they're organized in a similar way by week. And there's a lot there. So if you don't get every single week done, that's okay. Just, work about 20 minutes a day. Don't get overwhelmed. If you're doing all the online things and therefore you get less done from the packet, I'll be okay with that. Or if you get more of the stuff done from the packet and less of the online stuff, I'll probably be okay with that too. Just give me about 20 minutes a day, and that way your learning stays uninterrupted. Paul's Gaming, just so I can give you credit for being here, how about you type in what your name is, and I will write that down as soon as I find my pen. Hi. So I want to make sure I give you credit for being here. So, who is Paul? Because I'm pretty sure I don't have Paul in class. I know Brianna's here, Malachi's here, and Raquel was here. So I'll make sure I give you guys credit for being here. So if you want to remain anonymous, that's okay, but you get extra credit for showing up to the streaming, so you might want to show up. I don't think I have a Paul in class, so not sure who to give credit to. I am about to sign off though, so from the high school. Okay, that makes sense then. So you're welcome to show up too. That's fine. I'm done though for the day. It's 2:35, so I ran over by a few minutes. So I appreciate y'all sticking around. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them either on Google Classroom, shoot me an email, or you can get a hold of me in Google Hangouts. That shows up on my phone or my computer, so you can also ask questions in either of those. So good to see everybody, and I'll talk to you later.